Welcome everybody to the first of this year's series of ECEPTS Deep Dive webinars. This one, as you can see from the title slide, is focused on our role as an industry intermediary. Those of you who don't mind turning on your screens, it would be so great to see some faces, because anyone who's presented on Zoom knows that if you're just looking at typed names, it is just disconcerting. So, thank you all so much. I really appreciate that. And feel free to laugh at my jokes. That's even more encouraging. Okay, so with that, I am Randy Wolf. I am the founder and executive director of ECEPTS, which is Early Care and Education Pathways to Success. And you'll hear more about us in a minute, but I want to frame this particular webinar jumping to the end of the slides before we keep going, which is to say, we really want to talk today about the role of intermediary, and that is the focus. But in order to explain that focus, you have to understand something about apprenticeship and something about ECEPTS and what all this means. It's sort of like, you can't really explain the role of a second grade teacher if you've never heard of a public school or if you've never worked with 7-year-olds. So it's a little bit, I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but it's a little bit like that. So what I want to say about intermediary, it's a new concept within the world of registered apprenticeship. It's something that is evolving, but the basic idea is the federal government and the state of California, for those of you, and probably many other states that are represented here, the idea of expanding apprenticeship as a way of creating pathways to really effective pathways to industries, careers in industries that have not traditionally been part of the apprenticeship system. It occurred to people as this thing kept growing and expanding that you can't really just wake up one day and decide to do this work. Somebody has to help you. Somebody has to guide you, mentor you, onboard you. And so this notion of an intermediary became a thing, and people are still kind of inventing it as they go. And you'll hear our version of invention as we go through this webinar. But at its core, it is the idea of providing training and technical assistance to apprenticeship sponsors or training providers or employers or any and all of the above in the interest of expanding, developing, and sustaining apprenticeships, and in our case, ECE apprenticeships. So hold that thought in your mind as we now back up a little bit before we go forward. Next slide. So this is our mission. We have been around since 2019, although we had 4 years of work before that, which sort of built the foundation of what ECEPTS became. But what's notable about our mission is that it's not all about apprenticeships. We have a much broader mission than that. Apprenticeship is a major means to what we consider our primary end. And that's what this mission statement captures. Okay, next slide. And again, although ECEPTS is best known for our work with ECE apprenticeships, particularly in California, we think of it as that we have 3 buckets of what our work involves. The first is creating and expanding apprenticeships, not only for ECE teachers, but also for home visitors, for expanded learning workers, and for youth apprentices. The second bucket, which is connected to the first, is field building, because as we got more and more involved in all of this work, we realized that we were accidentally among the pioneers in this whole undertaking, and that to really capitalize on the moment and the opportunity that registered apprenticeship offers to the world of ECE needed some guidance and coordination. And so we started inventing things like our national conference, and we started inventing things like this webinar series. And you'll hear more about some of the other stuff we've done. And in fact, serving as an intermediary is part of that field building effort. And then the third bucket is advocacy for change. Sorry, I'm looking down because I can't find my shoes. Sorry about that. Advocacy for change, because you can't really work in ECE, especially in ECE workforce development, without also looking simultaneously at advocacy and systems change. And 2 of the things we particularly look at, one is setting a goal to achieve compensation parity with the pre-K to 12 system. Because until, as a baseline, until ECE teachers with similar backgrounds and experience and credentials can take for granted that they'll earn compensation on par with second grade teachers and sixth grade teachers and 11th grade teachers, then we're just still sort of, blowing in the wind, trying to operate as a system that's disjointed from everything else. And then closely related to that is the other major policy thing, which is that we have to stop talking about the wages issue as being the core barrier or stumbling block, and realize it is a funding issue. And so we fight for the idea that ECE has to be publicly funded, and it has to be a public good, the same way public schools, public community colleges, public libraries, where you have a sustainable base of funding and you're not trying to run an operation as if it's a bunch of disjointed, small, community-based programs. So that's our sort of full agenda as an organization. Next slide. There's a very good reason why we focus on apprenticeship as a training model. And that is because apprenticeship in this country has been around for about 100 years. And there are regulations in the Department of Labor that govern it. It's not just a new invention. It's not the new shiny object. It's not the same as internships. It's not the same as field placements or practicums or student teaching. It is part of a national system through the U.S. Department of Labor, and then state level offices or offices of apprenticeship or state apprenticeship agencies. But the reason it's so useful for ECE is that at the core of the apprenticeship system is the idea of preparing workers with the skills, knowledge, and competencies to achieve at the career option that they've chosen. And we know in ECE that the key to success of an early care and education experience is the quality and the preparation of the teacher. Everything else comes second. You need a safe environment, of course. You need a clean environment, but you need a teacher who knows how to make the most of those environments and who understands young children so they can also make give the most to what those children are in need of. So apprenticeships lead to high-skilled workers, and high-skilled workers is the key to successful ECE. So if teacher quality leads to better child outcomes, apprenticeships lead to better teacher quality. Excellent apprenticeships will lead to better child outcomes. Next slide. So this is my favorite definition of what is a registered apprenticeship. And I want to just read through it real quickly because each phrase here has significance. Industry-driven, high-quality career pathways. Let me start right there. This is not something that's just sort of independently offered through colleges, regardless of if there's any connection to the on-the-ground service providers, which there are plenty of models of. I mean, historically, higher ed is kind of a disjointed system from the worker system. This is industry-driven. There should not be apprenticeships for which there are not worker shortages, because if a person finishes an apprenticeship and at the end there's no jobs, something's wrong. That's the whole point of apprenticeship. Train people for fields in which there are jobs and labor demand. So industry-driven high-quality career pathways through which, number one, employers can develop and prepare their future workforce because the apprenticeship is addressing a workforce shortage. And number two, both new and incumbent workers can obtain paid work experience, classroom instruction, or training. It depends on the design of the apprenticeship, and industry-recognized credentials. Next slide. So this takes the previous slide and just breathes a little bit more life into it. These are the 5, I think the Department of Labor has updated this slide a little bit, but this is, to me, is still the clearest representation of the 5 critical elements of a registered apprenticeship program. Not only critical, but required. The first is paid job. There is no such thing as an unpaid apprentice, unlike other methods or models of professional development. From day one, an apprentice is an employee. They are a W-2 full-blown employee. They don't have to be full-time, but they have to be hired and paid. The second is there is a significant element, which is work-based learning. So that while they're doing their training, which we'll talk about in a second, they're also, even though, whether it's a time-based apprenticeship or a or a hybrid apprenticeship, or a competency-based apprenticeship, the three sort of options, they're always completing at least 2,000 hours of supervised, structured, on-the-job training. 2,000 hours being roughly 1 year of full-time work, although again, it doesn't have to be done in a full-time way. It could take 2 years, it could take 3 years. The third piece is, we say classroom learning. It doesn't actually have to be degree-driven. Our programs are, because we're in education and we need to be degree-driven. That's the world that we operate in. But the point is, there is a training component, which is above and beyond and ideally integrated with the work-based learning, so that the two pieces work together to make for an even more robust experience for the apprentice. Fourth is the mentorship. That not only are they doing work-based learning, and they always have, in the apprenticeship world, they call it a journeyman, but in ECE, we usually think of it as lead teacher or supervisor, direct supervisor. But the mentor is a little bit different. It's a different kind of relationship. And I probably won't talk much about this today, but we are on the verge of developing a statewide online model and program through which to train apprenticeship mentor teachers. That's maybe a topic for another day. And then lastly, an apprenticeship, because this is a DOL slide, it says national credential. It's really, that's sort of synonymous with an industry credential. So in ECE, there is no national credential, although things like the CDA are nationally utilized, but it's not a standard. So each ECE apprenticeship in their particular state or environment have to figure out what is the industry credential that the apprentice will earn by completing their apprenticeship. We think of these 5 elements as the lowest common denominator, and then we build upon it to actually expand what we do in the name of a registered apprenticeship program model to specifically meet the needs and the strengths and the challenges that we know our workforce faces and brings to the table. Next slide. And this, I'm not going to take too much time on this today because I want to get to the point about the intermediary. But this is an important slide, because when I say that the 5 elements on the previous slide are the lowest common denominator, this shows you what I'm talking about. This is stuff that's not required in the registered apprenticeship system, but it is required in the ECEPTS model of ECE registered apprenticeships. So to begin with, our participants don't pay anything. That one way or another, in some cases, the funding comes through the community colleges. In some cases, it comes through state funding that we've received. In some cases, it comes from private funding. In some cases, it comes from the employer. But one way or another, all the costs associated with participating in an ECEPTS apprenticeship are covered. And the participants, what that means, particularly for our participants, is they're not accruing debt while they're trying to move forward in their professional development. They're working, they're earning salaries, and that salaries is not going to underwrite the cost of their ongoing professional development. The second piece is dedicated program staff. We will have a whole deep dive webinar on this notion of success coordinators later in the series, which reminds me, anyone who is not on our mailing list, if you'll just email us at ECEPTS@ECEPTS.org, and tell us, do you want to be on the mailing list? We'll be happy to put you on the mailing list, because we will send out e-blasts that let you know when the next webinar is, when the conference is, that kind of thing. So please be in touch with us about that. So the success coordinator is different than a case manager, because as we say in ECE, our people are not cases, they're people. But that's the person who actually keeps track of the whole picture of that apprentice, not just the on-the-job learning piece of it, and not just the training piece, but the whole picture. And that's the person who knows, for example, that somebody just lost their apartment, and it may be tough for them to get to class for the next 2 weeks because they're sleeping on a friend's couch, which is 45 minutes away. Or it may be that the instructor comes to them and says, you know, so-and-so is kind of struggling in class. Can you see what, I've tried to work with them, but it'd be helpful if you could intervene. So they really are trying to really think about each individual apprentice in a very individual way. The mentor is focusing more specifically on their on-the-job training program. On-the-job training experience, and increasing their skills and capacities, and keeping one eye on our competency-based assessment so that they actually are competent in all those competencies by the end of their apprenticeship. The embedded tutor is, the idea is we want someone taking those classes, or at least participating in those classes, alongside the apprentices. So when they have questions or they come to tutoring, that person knows what the instructor actually said, what the expectations actually were, and it's a much more informed way of providing support to the apprentices because they know what's going on. And then the academic counselor, I don't know if this is true across the country. I can tell you it's very true in California, that too often our ECE folks, child development folks, take many, many courses in child development or early childhood studies, but it's not on track to a degree because they're afraid to take the English courses. They're afraid to take the math courses. And without those courses, they could end up with 30 credits, but they're no closer to a degree than they were, you know, many courses prior. We want our academic counselors to make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure people are taking the courses that are going to be not only degree applicable, but transferable when they want to go on to a four-year university, because most of our work at this point is still with community colleges, although increasingly we are expanding our BA program. And then the two bottom squares, one is talking about how we ensure participant-centered on-the-job training, the work-based learning piece, and participant-centered related supplemental instruction or related technical instruction, which is the training piece. And what you can see is we set things up. We don't take things for granted. We know what the risks are in terms of the unintended inequities that end up in programs because people didn't think about how to set things up to really be real and honest about grappling with the challenges. We want folks in a cohort, not only because they support each other, they inspire each other, they also help each other concretely. It's often the case that somebody who is fluent in English and in Spanish can help their friends who don't have the same degree of proficiency in English, but can help them in real time as they're listening to a lecture. Or we've had situations where somebody who is fully bilingual will say to the instructor, look, I understand English and you're using words that I don't understand. So I don't know how my friends are keeping up with you. That kind of feedback is really important. And a cohort helps you ensure that you get that kind of feedback. In-program childcare services so that they don't have to worry about finding childcare, much less paying for it. Technology access and training, we have found that it's essential that we provide a laptop to every apprentice. At the beginning of we began this work, we found that apprentices were trying to do their work on phones because it's the only technology they had access to. And mental health services, in the Head Start design, there's always been funding for mental health services, not just for children, but for staff. This is a high stress job in many ways, and you've got a high stress workforce. If for no other reason than they're receiving poverty level wages, that is a high stress situation. And so providing those mental health services often becomes the difference between somebody succeeding and somebody dropping out. And then the participant-centered related supplemental instruction, which again is, in our case, is the community college training. We don't assume our folks are going to go to the college campus. Sometimes it's not accessible by public transportation. Sometimes it's not safe to go to at night, even if you do have public transportation. Sometimes it's just not. Our folks are all working full-time or half-time. They can't take a class that meets from 1 to 2:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we require that the community colleges we work with offer classes according to their schedules, the apprentices' schedules, which means evenings and weekends, usually. We also create stackable apprenticeships. It's very hard to market to someone who's never been to college, for whom English is not their first language, who is also a single mother of 2 young children and, first-generation college student. It's hard to market a program that would say, you'll be able to get your BA and be ready to be a lead teacher at, wages that begin to be family sustaining. And it will only take you 5 or 6 years and it won't cost you anything. That's a tough marketing strategy because they haven't had day one of success. So we create stackable apprenticeships so they can start where they feel comfortable and confident or where their challenge is not insurmountable. It's sort of like somebody I know is trying to work with a trainer to increase their level of exercise. Well, if you told them they had to do 30 minutes a day of hardcore aerobics for the rest of their life, that they're just going to sit on the couch. But if you say, start with 10 minutes 3 times a week and just take a brisk walk, it's a little bit like that. So I'll talk in the next slide about what these programs look like. So I won't talk about that now. Competency-based, not ready, go back. Competency-based, like I said, is one of 3 ways apprenticeships can be structured. It's a little deceiving because it sounds like if somebody can prove their competencies, they can make their apprenticeship shorter. And they can, to the extent that like a BA apprenticeship will likely take way more than 1 year of full-time working. So if somebody can finish their BA and with only 2,000 hours, and they can prove competency, then they've saved themselves a lot of time because usually it'll take probably 3,000 or 4,000 hours. That takes more explanation, so don't worry if you're a little bit confused about that. And lastly, I mentioned this earlier, all of our programs are both what we require is degree applicable and transferable between community colleges and also to four-year institutions. Next slide. So this shows you the programs that ECEPTS has registered at this point. And I say at this point because we are constantly designing and registering new programs. But right now, the 3 stack of the, it's a funny way we've pictured this. I'll explain that in a minute. But the 3 stackable, the obviously stackable apprenticeships. One is for the associate teacher. Those of you in other states, our associate teacher permit is the equivalent of a CDA in many other states. The teacher, the way we've defined the teacher apprenticeship is that they earn their AA degree, and I have to update this slide, and the master teacher permit, the lead teacher permit, even though we don't consider that, we would like to see lead teachers with BA degrees, but it's a mixing of California terminology with the names of these programs. And then the lead teacher is the BA program where they also get their site supervisor permit. In some cases, they get their site supervisor permit in the teacher apprenticeship. So it's not a perfect world. Every apprenticeship group has the ability to tweak it to make sure they meet their needs. The expanded learning program, and that's, for those of you who might not know, that's the new term for after school and summer programs. And the program we've designed gets folks a teacher permit and 1 semester shy of an AA degree. And we see it as a springboard, a pipeline into more advanced ECE apprenticeships. And when the day comes that there's an abundance of pre-K to 3rd grade school-based, school district-based apprenticeships as well, that you'd have people who came out of the expanded learning environment. This is usually a population of young people of color who want to work with kids. You don't really aim to be an expanded learning program leader as a career, an ultimate career. It's a stepping stone. So let it be a stepping stone where they get grounded in early childhood development and pedagogy. They get almost an AA degree, all of which are degree applicable to transfer to a four-year university. And then they can move on either to ECE or to, K-12, K-8, however it's structured in your state. The home visitor is just what it says. They get their associate teacher permit. And so in that sense, the associate teacher apprenticeship is also stackable to the home visitor apprenticeship is also stackable to the teacher apprenticeship. Again, it's a little hard to explain this in 1 hour, but anyhow. But the home visitor apprenticeship also adds additional courses that are beyond just ECE, because to be a home visitor, you need a little bit of grounding in sort of basic social work, sociology, to understand working with families, working with parents, and so forth. The 3 blue categories are all registered apprenticeships. The 3 red ones are registered, but they're not apprenticeships. So the first is a registered pre-apprenticeship. In California, you can register pre-apprenticeships. The DOL encourages pre-apprenticeships, but as far as I know, they can't be registered as of now. That may change. A pre-apprenticeship by definition is basically the coursework and training that you need in order to qualify to enter an apprenticeship. So in another field, it might be, I always use this as an example, and it's a really silly example. But if you're going to go into an electrician's apprenticeship, Maybe they require you have to know how to, you know, plug in a light bulb or screw in a light bulb before you can, that's why it's a dumb, forgive me, electricians, for the simplicity of my analogy. But they have to learn those skills before they can enter the electrician's apprenticeship. Well, in ECE, it's in some ways a bigger deal. If you are in at least in California, and I bet this is true elsewhere, if you're in a state-funded preschool classroom, often the entry-level requirement is an AA degree, or certainly some kind of entry level, a CDA or something like that. If you can't be hired until you have that entry level requirement, then that's a problem, because how are you supposed to get that entry level requirement if you can't afford tuition, for example? So a pre-apprenticeship is a way to get you those things you need in order to qualify to enter the apprenticeship. It becomes a really important piece when you're talking about attracting new workers as opposed to incumbent workers. Family childcare is a whole nother animal. In California, we have a registered on-the-job training program for family childcare providers. We run it just like the associate teacher and teacher apprenticeships, except that it's not an apprenticeship, because family childcare providers are small business owners. They don't have access to an on-site supervisor. They can't be guaranteed of wage increases, which I didn't say earlier. That's another requirement. You have to earn more money by the end of your apprenticeship than you did when you started. And family childcare, as small business owners, they don't have access to workman's comp. So we are starting to work with people across the country and engaging, hopefully we'll be able to engage the Department of Labor and the Administration of Children and Families to try and figure out what can we do so that the 4 million women, most of them are women of color and immigrants and mothers across this country offering family childcare, who are very eager to be part of these programs. We know that because we've worked with a lot of them at this point. Figure out a way for them to be able to get into the registered apprenticeship system and or receive the benefits of that system, even if they can't be counted as a registered apprentice. And lastly is our youth apprenticeship program. Youth apprenticeship is the program isn't a youth apprenticeship. It is, in our case, it's usually an associate teacher program. That's what they're earning between their junior and senior year. But the people in the program are high school students. So what distinguishes a youth apprenticeship is who's in the program, not the courses and the content of the program design. As youth apprenticeship becomes a bigger deal in this country, one of the challenges we've had, which we are being somewhat successful, is that in some ways the high schools, the high schools, because it's youth apprentice, the youth are in high school, but the high schools reflect the same bias that the apprenticeship system does at large, which is their goal is to put people, particularly people from disenfranchised communities, under-resourced communities, impoverished communities, into pathways to middle-class jobs. And often what that means is they try to figure out what are the fields that pay surprisingly well and don't require a ridiculous amount of training. And of course, ECE, it's the ultimate square peg in the round hole, because we do require very high levels of training and we don't pay what we should be paying. And yet, without us, nobody else goes to work. And the pandemic certainly proved that point. And so when people are designing youth apprenticeships, they're often starting with things like tech or healthcare or agriculture or cybersecurity. And what I say is, if you don't start looking at developing youth apprentices for young people who want to work with people in early childhood, in elementary or higher ed, in social work, in social services, in the public sector, we're going to have a really lopsided workforce in 10 or 20 years. And so we are really trying to, and we are demonstrating success. We have right now in 3 different school districts in California, 4 different school districts, where we are actively engaging young people. So that's our last program. Next slide. Okay, so to give you just a quick overview of like what we're doing exactly, how do we spend our time? There are 2 roles that we take. And again, I'm trying to do this within a very short period of time. So what I'm running through today, we also have a way of presenting this information in the course of a 1-day training or a 2-day training, because a lot of this takes a lot more explanation. But I want to give you as much of an overview as I can. So we have 2 roles. We are the apprenticeship sponsor, which is the fiduciary legal entity that operates an apprenticeship program. So anyways, I'll say more about that in a second. The second role is this industry intermediary, which is the training and technical assistance to support programs, whether or not we're sponsoring them. That's the distinction. So in California, we are actually sponsoring 22 community-based registered apprenticeship programs that are in 10 counties. We have about 50 employers. We're working with 15 community colleges and 1 university at the moment. We have more than 400 active apprentices, and like I said, we had 5 registered apprenticeships. Nationally, primarily because of this new contract with the Department of Labor, we're now actually working in 13 states. And I'm using that wording very carefully. It would be presumptuous and somewhat misleading to say we're working with 13 states because it sounds like we're working statewide. That's not the case. We have, so this is a list of examples. We're working with one of the the National Association for Education of Young Children. One of the state affiliates is building an apprenticeship program in one state. We're working with a community college in Illinois. We're working with community-based ECE programs in Kansas City and in Hawaii, and there's new ones all the time. We're working with Head Start programs. We're working with some national organizations and supporting them as they develop a whole network of apprenticeships within their national organization. And then we're working with state-funded ECE registered apprenticeship initiatives because some of the states have that. So it's a whole variety of things, but those programs we're not sponsoring. We're providing training and technical assistance, including to whoever is or whatever entity is going to be the sponsor. Next slide. Okay, so this is the slide that actually explains in great detail what does it mean to work with ECEPTS. And I should mention there are 2 other national industry intermediaries that are also receiving funding from the Department of Labor to provide those services. And one is 1199C, which I have a hard time explaining to you what that is. It's complicated, but you can look it up on the internet. And they have a contract to serve the care economy more broadly. So ECE is part of that. And the other is called the Early Childhood Workforce Connector. And they got a contract similar to ours. And then there's ECEPTS. So with all the industry intermediaries have a great deal of autonomy and freedom to do things how they see fit. And the recipients of our training and technical assistance, you can sort of go shopping and decide who you want to work with, who resonates with what you're trying to do. It's not just about geography, it's sometimes about experience or who's speaking a common language. So in our case, this is how we sort of characterize what we do or what we can do, because this isn't like, you don't have to do all 8 things. And we say step, it's not, I got to update this slide. It's not really steps. That makes it sound like it's linear, and it's not. But these are the 8 components of what we do as an industry intermediary. The first is helping programs decide whether this is something they want to do and giving them enough information and enough basic framework and understanding to recognize to decide, is this something that would be appropriate for our program? Or are we better off doing something else? Are we better off doing things the way we have been because it's working just fine? The second is assessing a community. We think of this never as working with one entity in a community because it's a partnership. You have to have employers, you have to have training providers. You often want workforce development boards or people from your Office of Apprenticeship to be at the table. Sometimes you have local funders that you want at the table. So it's always a partnership. And so we never think of it as just one entity. We're working with a community. So when we assess alignment and readiness, part of what we're assessing is whether they're actually ready to do any kind of apprenticeship. But for us, it's also specifically whether they're ready to do our model. And part of what distinguishes that is our undeniable commitment to putting equity and access at the middle of program design, at the center of program design, and not compromise about that. And if a community says, look, we just can't do that, or that's not relevant in our community, it's like, hey, that's okay. We're not passing judgment. We're just saying, if you want to work with us, it makes sense to work with people who have a shared philosophy. It's sort of like if there was such a thing as a Head Start intermediary, and they were going to go around the country trying to foster the development and expansion of Head Start programs, it wouldn't make sense for them to spend time trying to train a program who, let's say, was deeply immersed in Reggio Emilia as a philosophy. They have their philosophy. They don't need to be Head Start. I mean, it's not a great analogy, but anyways, you get the point. Okay, just for those of you who aren't in ECE, I'll just clarify. It's not a great analogy. It's not a great analogy because you could have a Reggio Emilia program who is a Head Start provider. So don't worry about that. All right, step 3, designing your registered apprenticeship. This is where we work with people pretty intensively, which means meeting monthly, meeting every month, sometimes going in person a lot, we do on Zoom, but helping you figure out which program, what is your, first of all, what's your workforce needs? Where is the biggest hole in your workforce? What's also possible in terms of resources? Who are the employers who have the capacity to become, to really sponsor and sustain an apprenticeship? It's a very complicated process, and through it you learn a lot about what you're going to do for the next, hopefully years and years, because once you develop a program, the goal is to implement it, sustain it, and then expand it. Maybe you start with that entry-level position. Then now you got all these people who are finishing their entry-level credential. You want to build that next step. We want to build pathways to higher levels of leadership, better wages, and all the rest. The 4th is that, okay, now you've designed your program and you've registered it with the appropriate entities, the Department of Labor, your state apprenticeship agency, and now you actually have to register apprentices. And that's, again, it's another process to learn, and you have to learn the data collection procedures, and you have to learn about your state's database system versus the federal database system, and they don't always talk to each other. So it's a lot of double work sometimes. But it's just, again, it's a lot of learning, and that's part of what we do, is help teach people literally how to do this work. Then the next is what we call ORSE, planning and carrying out outreach, recruitment, selection, and enrollment. Oh, sorry, I said something in step 4. I was talking about registering the apprenticeship program, not the apprentices. And that's where the working with your state and federal system comes into play. Step 5 is about outreach and recruitment and selection of apprentices. And often when people, like, say they want to aim to start a program in August, because it's a new semester, and let's say they contacted us in October, and we're going to work with them for 10 months to be able to launch in August. And they think, well, why should we start in October? We've got so much time. Well, it turns out it takes usually 5-6 months to actually get through steps 1 to 4. And then you need a good 4 or 5 months for step 5, because first of all, you have to decide who you're outreaching to and how are you outreaching, and what does that involve? And does it involve community meetings? Does it involve webinars? Does it involve flyers? Where are you going to put those flyers so the right people see them? Then you have to actually decide your eligibility criteria. Who is allowed to be in, how much command of English do they have to have in order to be in this program if you have limited capacity to meet the needs of English language learners, just as an example. Then if you have over enrollment, you have to figure out how you're going to prioritize, and how you're going to prioritize with equity as a driving principle. And then you have to enroll them. And enrollment isn't easy either, because this is ECE. They have to have background checks. They have to pass fingerprinting. They have to enroll in the college and then register for the course. And sometimes you find that somebody has a bursar hold from 1999 when they had $49 they never paid. And until that bill is cleaned up, they can't register. So all kinds of unforeseen things happen. So we tell folks, you better start with your ORSE in March or April, so that by July, you're just ready to roll. And you can start that program in August without, going crazy at the last minute. Then, which leads to step 6, you launch your program, and which means everything. They start working, they start taking courses, they start functioning as a cohort for support, they start receiving tutoring, they start receiving mentoring, everything kicks in. And it's one of the analogies, it is sort of like having your first child, where those of you who are parents and you remember back to the first 3 months of your first child's life, you didn't even realize what a bubble you were in and how intense it was. until you look back a year later, or until you have your second child and realize how much easier it is sometimes under good conditions. Anyways, launching that first apprenticeship program is a big deal, and you don't want to do it on your own. You want the help of people who've been there, done that, and can guide you, help you troubleshoot and put out fires and all that kind of stuff. And some of the things I'm talking about, like for instance, you've spent a year cultivating a relationship with this dean at a community college who's making lots of things possible. And you find out in July that that dean has just accepted a position as a vice president of instruction at a different community college across the state. And now you have to, not that your program starts from scratch, but the relationship building starts from scratch. That's the kind of unexpected things I'm talking about. And then, like I said, step 7 is, okay, now you've run a successful cohort, and by 3, 4, 6 months into it, you start recruiting for your second cohort. You want to be able to keep this pathway and this pipeline going, because one cohort's not going to solve your workforce shortage. And that might mean you started with one employer, but by the second round, you want to bring on another employer. Gets more complicated, although it does increase your capacity. Or you want to start developing the next level of the apprenticeship. That's planning and expansion. And then lastly, but it shouldn't be last because it's really sort of interwoven in lots of these steps, is this whole data reporting and management. There is data reporting and management that comes from the Department of Labor, that comes from your state apprenticeship agency. There's also, if you get a grant from some private funder, there's that data reporting. If you get grants from your state workforce system or your state ECE system, there's that reporting. It's a lot. And we have spent the last 4.5 years, especially the last year, figuring out how to make a data reporting and management system that doesn't make everybody want to blow their brains out. And we're just on the cusp of being able to say we have that. So I'm not going to mention it yet. By the next time I do this seminar, I will. But we have a contract with a particular apprenticeship platform that is designing for us a whole system of doing data reporting. So it's everything from when the apprentice has to sign their apprentice registration form that has to get uploaded into the Department of Labor's database, they can DocuSign it on their phone. That's in the system. So the colleges have to report grades, because in California, that's a requirement. You have to show the progress they're making on their related instruction. The instructors can upload the grade report into the system. The program administrators can upload all of the people's names and, when they started and if they took a leave of absence and if they completed, if they dropped out. All of that is going to be in this one very user-friendly system. And what we're hoping is once we master this thing, we'll be able to market it across the country so that let's say there's some kind of a network in Ohio, and we end up working with 3 programs across Ohio who themselves are connected, maybe Head Start or something. If they opt to use the same system, it wouldn't be a contract with us, it'd be a contract with this platform. But then we have the potential for our systems to talk, which in terms of research, of course, would be so valuable to be able to coalesce all that data. And so that gives you an overview of what does it mean, what do we do in the name of being an industry intermediary. Next slide. So as I said earlier, we have expanded our field building activities, partly because the field keeps growing and the needs keep growing and also becoming clarified. So last year, we've done now 3 national conferences. The first one in 21 was still during COVID, so it was online. The second one in 22 and the third one in 23 were both in-person national conferences that involved like 20+ states around the country. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But last year we tried this thing where there was a pre-conference. The conference goes from Monday night till Thursday afternoon. We tried a pre-conference called Apprenticeship 101. And the intention was anybody who really didn't know what they were getting into, but they were very interested and somebody in their state told them they should be thinking about this and they wanted to get some information. Well, we figured out that if they could come to a 1-day training and get what I just did in 45 minutes, if they could get this in like 6 hours, the rest of the conference would make more sense to them. So of the 220 people who came to the conference last year, about 94 came to the Apprenticeship 101. A lot of them weren't brand new. They just wanted the orientation and the information. So we're going to repeat that at this year's conference. I'll talk about that in a second. But the idea of a boot camp came out of that experience, because we realized, well, if we meet groups between the conference in May and the conference next May, and they don't want to wait another year, and they really are ready to go, they've got enough partners around the table, they have enough understanding, they want to get, what's the next? Okay, we did 101, where is 10, where's the course 110 or 201? That's what the boot camp is meant to be. So we planned 3 boot camps this year. One was in October in Chicago. The next one coming up is in Nashville in January. And the last one is in Santa Fe in March. All of them timed so that people still can come to the national conference in May. I will tell you that there is a small fee attached, which is $125 per person for the entire thing. It's a day and a half. That fee, if we had gotten the DOL contract before we concocted this idea, we wouldn't have charged anything, but we didn't, and so it's a thing of timing. But we sincerely believe that $125 won't be a backbreaker. I would even go so far as to say if you're interested in attending and you really don't have that kind of funding at your disposal, to talk to us and we'll see what we can do. At any rate, it's a day and a half program. We encourage you to come as a team. Doesn't have to be all inclusive. It could just be the first 3 people you know for sure are interested. You could always fill out the team later. But if you come, because the way this is set up, there'll be times in the course of the boot camp when we're going to present something, then you're going to work on it for half an hour. Then we're going to present something else. You're going to work on that for half an hour. If you're by yourself, I mean, it's not that it's not useful, but 2 heads are better than one. You want to be there as the employer with your community college partner, because together it's like the whole is greater. What is it? The sum of the parts. If there's any mathematician here, put it in the chat box. Whatever that expression is, the sum is greater. I don't know. Okay. Anyways, so we encourage people to come as teams, and we limit it to 40 because we don't want the room to be so full that we can't really give people. The same reason you don't want 40 kindergartners in one classroom. Ideally, you want, 18 or 20, sort of like that. Anyone on this call who's interested and wants to come to Nashville, don't wait too much longer because the registration is filling up. We set these up in 3 areas of the country thinking people would choose the one that was closest by. Turns out that's not the case. It's much more about dates, because we had people from Alaska come to Chicago, so that blew that theory. So you're welcome to any of them. It doesn't matter. Next slide. And so this was our save the date. The actual Evite is coming out next week with the link to the registration page. And the call for presentations came out like a week or 2 ago. It will come out again next week in this e-blast about the conference. But this gives you the dates. It's going to be in Sacramento this year, here in California. And we're doing something new oh, this is the save the date, so it doesn't say. But in addition to the Apprenticeship 101 that I talked about before, we're also going to do an Apprenticeship a Head Start Apprenticeship 101. So that it's the same basic idea of a day-long introduction to apprenticeship, but everyone in the room will be Head Start. Everyone in the other room will be some kind of combination of other, everybody but Head Start. And I think that's the last slide. Is that the last slide? Okay, that's our contact information. Again, ECEPTS@ECEPTS.org is our, mailbox where you can just send us some kind of inquiry. You could also send it to me, but it's probably quicker to do it at the ECEPTS@ECEPTS.org. And with that, we have a few minutes, so we could actually open up the chat box, or actually, let's see, there's 37 people. Here, Barbara, why don't we turn off and then stop this. I'll remove my spotlighting. And if folks want to just raise if we can see it, we're on one screen. Yeah. If you want to come off of your, turn on your video. And if folks have questions or comments, we have about 9 minutes. Who has a question or a comment?
Nicely done, Dr. Wolf. It's good to see you.
Thank you, except you're not Steve Lutton. Why do you have Steve Lutton's name on you?
I came in through his link.
Got it. I consider myself very controversial. I expect people to have questions and objections and wanting points of clarification. but this could be that we're meeting with the willing, so it's a little easier of an audience. No questions, no comments?
My comment would just be it's exciting. It's fine. It's time for something like this in our field, and I'm very hopeful to see it succeed. So thank you for your energy and vision.
Thanks. And Jeannie, since you're someone new to me, and this is sort of new to you, did this webinar sort of fill in holes for you and give you the kind of next steps that you needed to understand things?
Yeah, it's definitely starting to come together, and it pretty much parrots what we've been scraping by and doing on our own for 6 years.
Right.
It's wonderful to see a national move towards a real teacher pipeline program.
Great, thank you. Others, questions, comments? Marsha?
Randy, I'm just going to say thanks. You know, I'm excited to hear that you're going to be focusing on an early, on a Head Start piece. And I think that's going to be great. You know, I'm a big fan. I've followed along.
Thank you. And Marsha, I don't know if you know, but actually ECEPTS is partnering with Teach. Those of you who know, okay, Barbara will answer the questions in the chat box. Otherwise I get distracted. I'm going to actually close it. Those of you who know about Teach, which is a scholarship program, but it's more than that, that started in North Carolina and has gone national. They also have their own network of ECE apprenticeships, and Teach and ECEPTS are partnering so that we can provide some of the technical assistance that goes beyond what their own team has in terms of experience. It's a very exciting partnership because they're in 6 states right now. And we're going to see, you know, I don't know if you've been in touch with Megan, but it's very exciting what's happening there.
Yeah, it is very exciting. And she's telling me this in case those don't know. I used to be the CEO of Child Care Services Association and worked with Teach. And so that's how Randy and I know each other. The whole, you know, we're going to build this field together.
Right, right. Marsha had the audacity of retiring.
Yeah, well, kind of.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah. Anybody else? Last chance. Oh, good. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Randy and everyone. I'm calling in from the East Coast where it's getting a bit dark here, but I wanted to say thank you to Randy for the work that you do just on trying to align ECE pay with the K through 12 system. That's not something we hear every day, particularly in workforce investment board land. And so, yeah, controversial, but absolutely needed, right?
Thank you. Okay. Well, thanks. Yes, we will circulate anyone who signed up. You know, this is the world of Zoom. We all know this. You sign up for webinars, even if you don't know you're going to make it, because you can get the recording. And this is true here too. I think there were 150 people who signed up. That's just how it goes these days. So, but those, it's too bad we can't give you some special thing because you actually were here. We'll send you a box of popcorn with it or something. Anyways, you will receive the slides. Feel free to be in touch with us if you just need more information. If I went over something too quickly and you say, wait, I didn't get that one part. We welcome hearing from you. And thank you for coming, and we hope to see you again. I'll give you back 5 minutes of your life. Thanks, everybody.